Every minute of every day, millions of people go to work. People are harvesting crops, assembling electronics, and writing code. From the ground level, it looks like chaos. But all of these individual, seemingly disconnected activities actually form a single, trackable system. To make sense of this massive web of production and consumption, economists group these activities based on the specific nature of the work done. They divide the entire national economy into three fundamental categories: the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. Measuring the size and the balance of these three groups is the most reliable way to diagnose the structural health of a nation. This interdependent chain of activities dictates a nation's overall prosperity as value and labor shift from the ground up. When we look at the history of developed nations, a clear pattern emerges. Countries start with an economy based in the primary sector, usually agriculture. Over time, they industrialize, shifting focus to the secondary sector, and eventually mature into a tertiary, service-based economy. The crucial assumption built into this model is that human capital moves alongside the capital output. As production shifts to factories and then to offices, the national workforce is supposed to follow. But this split-screen graphic, mapping India's macroeconomic data from 1977 to 2018, shows a completely different reality. On the left, we see the gross value added output, what a country actually produces, which is overwhelmingly dominated by the tertiary sector. But on the right, the employment data shows the workforce remains heavily concentrated in the primary sector. India's smallest producing sector is inexplicably trapping the vast majority of the country's labor force. To understand modern India, we must dissect how the country leapfrogged to a service-dominant output while trapping over half its workforce in the fields. The primary sector encompasses any economic activity that directly utilizes or extracts natural resources from the earth. Whether it is cultivating cotton, running a dairy operation, or mining coal, the final output is a natural good. Because of this, production is strictly constrained by biological limits, weather patterns, and the physical availability of land. The secondary sector is the industrial engine. It takes those raw natural resources and manufactures them into higher value finished goods. It is the process of turning raw cotton into textiles. Historically, this industrialization phase is where a nation multiplies its raw economic value. And to run those factories at scale, the sector requires massive amounts of new labor. The two sectors are strictly interdependent. A textile mill sits idle if the primary sector fails to harvest the cotton. Because of this dynamic, the secondary sector is designed to act as a transitional bridge. It pulls surplus labor away from the hard physical limits of agrarian production and absorbs them into scalable manufacturing jobs. Finally, we reach the tertiary sector, which represents the most advanced stage of the economic value chain. The strict defining rule of this sector is that these activities do not produce any physical goods themselves. Instead, they exist entirely as a support system for the primary and secondary production processes. A manufactured good has no value if it sits in a warehouse. Logistics and transportation are the physical backbone of this sector. But the tertiary sector has evolved far beyond moving physical boxes. It now encompasses complex services, banking, accounting, administration, and massive information technology networks. As a nation's baseline income rises, public demand for these complex quality-of-life services naturally explodes. The tertiary sector acts as the ultimate indicator of a mature, consumption-driven economy. And this is the specific sector India relied upon for its modern growth. So, how does a government actually track this invisible web of interdependent activities? While gross domestic product measures the total volume of an economy, analyzing individual sectors requires a specialized metric called gross value added, or GVA. This formula takes the GDP and adjusts it by adding government subsidies and subtracting taxes. By stripping away the distortions created by taxes and subsidies, GVA provides the purest possible picture of what each individual sector is actually contributing. When we apply this GVA data to the last 4 decades of Indian economic history, we can locate exactly where the traditional employment model broke down. GVA serves as the vital diagnostic tool required to uncover the roots of India's structural paradox. These two stacked bar graphs visualize the macroeconomic shift between 1977 and 2018. The left graph tracks total GVA, and the right graph tracks total employment. Look at the GVA output on the left. tertiary services have expanded rapidly, overtaking the primary sector to become the largest producing force in the nation. Now, look at the employment graph on the right. There is a severe, unnatural lack of parallel movement. The primary sector stubbornly remains the massive, unmoving foundation of the labor market. We can trace this failure of industrial labor absorption by comparing the specific data points. Over 40 years, secondary industrial output grew by 9 times, but employment in that sector only grew by a factor of 3. The multiplier gap in the service sector is even more severe. Tertiary production skyrocketed by 14 times, but it only generated 5 times as many jobs. This is the phenomenon of jobless growth. The higher sectors successfully scaled their output, but they effectively severed the historical bridge designed to pull workers out of agriculture. By rapidly scaling production through technology rather than mass human capital, India inadvertently built an isolated, high-yield modern economy directly on top of a stagnant agrarian workforce. When we pull away from the historical trends and look at the mathematical reality of this bottleneck today, the numbers are brutal. This flow diagram illustrates the current paradox. More than half the workforce is funneled into the primary sector, generating only 1/6 of the national value. In contrast, the remaining minority in the secondary and tertiary sectors produce the other 5/6 of the economy. Looking at this discrepancy, we have to ask an uncomfortable analytical question. Does this data imply that Indian agricultural workers are inherently failing to produce what they could? No. The math is a symptom of structure, not a lack of effort. Because the industrial bottleneck prevents worker migration, surplus labor is forced to remain hidden in the fields, artificially suppressing their per capita value. This is a crisis of underutilization. You have far more people working on a single piece of land than are required to maximize crop yield. If you removed a significant portion of these workers, total agricultural production wouldn't drop at all. These workers are trapped. They are appearing employed but producing suboptimal value simply because the secondary and tertiary sectors did not generate the jobs needed to absorb them. True structural economic transformation requires both capital output and human employment to migrate together. You cannot move the money without moving the people. India's macroeconomic triumph in the service sector masks a profound structural flaw. Until the industrial bridge is repaired, half of its human potential will remain locked in an unoptimized, overburdened primary sector.